Umberto Eco, The Name of the Rose, Prologue. This time, I'm going to read an introduction that is attested to in the prologue. So, the prologue says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. This was beginning with God, and the duty of every faithful monk would be to repeat every day with chancing humility, the one never changing event whose incontrovertible truth can be asserted. But we see now through a glass darkly, and the truth, before it is revealed to all, face to face, we see in fragments. Alas, how illegible in the error of the world! So we must spell out its faithful signals, even when they seem obscure to us, and as if amalgamated with a will wholly bent on evil. So, uh, I'm going to read. I believe Adso Melk is referring here to the Vulgate Bible, which is uh, probably unchanged from the time of Constantine, bringing together the manuscripts of that were found. This from all the community of Jesus Christ and the early believers and of John and others before the Qumran papers were found. But uh, Adso Malk is making an argument, one, that they need to be explained, just as this manuscript that Umberto Eco has found needs some explanation, uh, and the one that I found of Umberto Eco's, the book, Name of the Rose, needs some explanation. The argument is that the Latin Vulgate needs explanation. So at this point, given that this was meant to be, I believe, the 14th century, so the 1300s, uh, or yeah, so 14th century, 1300s, he's making an argument that it either has been done. There was something called the vernacular, a German monk writing in Latin, for instance. So the vernacular was anything that wasn't Latin. It was considered proscribed or not permissible to write the Bible in those languages because after all these years, for at that point, uh, since the Council of Nicaea around 333 AD, since then, the texts have been kept perfect without a change from translated apparently from their various languages, Aramaic and others, into Latin uh, by a very expensive process and perfectly, and the word was kept complete. However, Adso is making an explanation that, okay, that's fine, we have them, but we need to explain what we have here. We've done all this work over these 1100 years or so, 14th century to 1300s. Let us do something else, even though it might get us, in trouble. So I have on my Amazon Kindle for PC the Geneva Bible, which is a 1587 edition, which was published by the United Reformed Church. Uh, they're not Calvinists, but they are adjacent to the Calvinists in that they're not really rebelling against the authority of Rome. They are rebelling against the need to take certain precautions like this, or at least saying that we are not Rome. We are separate, and we're going to do something a little bit different. So this is a Bible edition from 1587, which as you read it, it's meant almost for a preacher or for someone else. Instead of reading just the text of the Bible, you read some interpolation as well. And it very well may have been that this interpolation is just as old or older than the Council of Nicaea, because when I read it, so you'll hear it. For instance, I'll read verse 1. I'm going to read. So in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. This is from the first chapter of the Gospel of John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Mark is the oldest of the Gospels, written around 50 or so. Uh, Matthew and Luke share a common source, which may have been around during the time of Jesus himself, or at least during the time that the Gospels are concerned with. And it is, and they are the next two. And then there's the Gospel of John, which is said to have been written anywhere between 70 and 100. So Matthew and Mark, not Matthew, Mark. So Mark is written around the 50s AD. Luke and uh, Matthew were written, despite how they're listed, uh, in around the same time in the 60s or 70s. And then you have the book of John, written anywhere between 70 and 100. I took several courses with S. Scott Barchi at UCLA, the University of California, Los Angeles, where I studied the timing. But what you find is that I attended law school. When you attend law school and you're trying to figure out who said what and who did what, one one thing you can find, and I also studied history. I studied history at UCLA as an undergraduate. Sometimes you need to listen to the voice of a person and how does this person speak, use words, and what would it be like if they had to talk about themselves. I'm under the impression, because the book of John will eventually talk about John, who is considered the cousin of, he's a Levite, and he was created. There's a contention among Jewish scholars that how is it possible that John's father is Zechariah when Zechariah lived over 100 years before John? Well, others. Um, so you had Zechariah complain, or not complain, he did his once a year service, his part of the Levitical family, um, had temple duty on Yom Kippur, where you go into the Temple of Solomon. uh, if you were on Temple Mount today, I was privileged to go. You would head from the octagon down the stairs through the four arches, or pick one, of course, and you would see a mosque, which is called Masjid Marwan or Marwaniya. It also is called Al-Aqsa, the farthest place of prostration, the far mosque, in relation, most people say, to Mecca, if not in relation to Yemen. Um, so the farthest extent of the kingdom, you would say, of Solomon and Sheba, but the far mosque. But if you go and look inside the mosque, before you walk in, there's a tiler there, a guard. You'll look to the left, and you'll see a sign, if you can read the Arabic, I believe it's in English too. It says Al-Aqsa Adima, the farthest and Otis. Um, and so you descend, if you are ready and you can, descend down, and you'll find the original Temple of Solomon. And so you go in there, and what would happen is the Levite would go in there, and he would be attached to a cord, and people would be out. He was the only one allowed in, and only his family on his chosen day, on his chosen year, or the assigned day or assigned year, and he would go down into this place and engage in ritual prayer with God. Some people think that he took ergot or psilocybin or something else. I noticed. I didn't. I mean, I can't say I noticed. I didn't smell a gas, but I went down, down, down into this place. I didn't go to the very floor, and you notice a parabolic reality there, a gravity, a constriction, and I noticed I didn't have the rope on, but I have a Levitical background. I didn't know then, but maybe others did. So I walked in, and then I sat there for some time. You see one of the large pillars that has become famous within the Masonic tradition is sitting there. I don't know if it's well, I'm going to say it's Boaz that's sitting there. They also extend downward into the quarries of Solomon, which I was walked into first. So I'm sitting there, and then at some point, I'm watching a man do prayers. I consider Islamic prayer a form of yoga. And there's a man who has uh, relatively brown skin, like myself, an olive brown or olive green, they would say in Sudan. And there's his two children, a boy and a girl, who are kind of milling about him while he's doing his bowing and prostrations. And then after kind of watching him for a time, that means we were facing south. I get up and I attempt to walk out. This is between the well, the 6th hour. You would count it from a Roman time period, and the 9th hour of the day between our high noon and uh, and uh, and 3 o'clock or so, somewhere around there in Arabic between Dhuhr and Asr. I know this because I prayed Dhuhr in the mosque, and then I went downstairs with and went inside with kind of a Levitical dip already on me from before. So I was there, hopefully properly there on my birthday, August 15th, which is considered one of the days of the Ascension of Mary, and also a day formally dedicated to the Earth Mother, actually not the Earth Mother, the mother of the outer space, the Queen of Heaven, the Queen of Space, Isis, who also was the mother of a child by uh, without the service of a man directly, but through his seed. And so I'm in there, and I try to walk. I walk up, and I try to walk out, and I've studied some law about how to retain at least certain aspects of uh, your holy your ablution state. If you fall on your behind, where you can say it would be almost impossible to pass wind, and then you fall asleep or you pass out, you will wake up with your ablutions in place. So I could tell that I was going to faint. When I was a child, I had fainting spells. I sat down on my behind. I took my backpack off my back and I wrapped it around me. There's a phrase, trust in God, but don't forget to tie up your camel so it doesn't get stolen, or people don't think you're leaving it there for some kind of charity. And I grabbed hold of it, and all I remember is hitting the floor, or maybe laying on my backpack the whole time. And I woke up to the sound of the 9th hour or the mid-afternoon prayer, and walked out. And so there is some force in there, some maybe because it's underground and it's contained. There's a parabolic reality that kind of puts you out. And so it said that Zechariah had this event happen, and in that time period, he was given a revelation that he would have a son, and he said that, well, how is it possible for me to have a son when I've reached old age and my wife is barren, or I'm not one who maybe I have my appalling marriage where I'm married to her, but we don't have sex. That's another meaning of it too. And we'll get to the vow of John in a second. And so he and God said, it's easy for me. Wait and see. And so it is very likely to it's said by rabbis, if there are two things that are inconsistent in the word, then try to find a third explanation for them, because it to make it consistent. And so I would say if Zechariah did live 100 years or so before the birth of John, he left in a solution that could preserve it. his seed, his semen, and it was kept, preserved that entire time, and into a Levitical woman was found to use it, and that was Our Lady Elizabeth, the mother of John. She would have been the one selected to become pregnant with his seed, so she became his wife at that point. So, my wife is barren could have also meant that he wasn't married. He had taken a vow not to be married. So he left, and 100 years later, and this could happen today, you can leave some sperm in a bank 100 years later and produce a child. There very likely is seed and sperm of different individuals that is hanging out somewhere that could be impregnated with some today, and they would have a son. And I believe it is this. So this is the explanation that this Acho wants. Uh, uh, that this is how John was born, and his mother Elizabeth was pregnant when Mary became pregnant in a very similar way. The seed of a man who had the Ibur, or the spirit of Zeus, or the spirit of Jupiter, or God the Father upon him, was used to impregnate Mary, and that man would eventually uh, die, and so the spirit that he had, the blessing that he had, the anointing, passed on to her son. And so God the Father, the reality that we call the planet Jupiter, having a hold on this man and his seed, passed on into Mary through this. Uh, through this efflux, and she became pregnant without the, as Hera said, maybe she is Hera. I became pregnant without violating my oath to my husband Jupiter or Zeus, and without him present, without him there. The Queen of Sheba says in the Song of Songs in chapter 2 or 3, "My beloved my beloved and I are now one, yet he is not here." So saying that Solomon was also, he may have had wives in a sense that he provided sperm for them as well to get pregnant without him actually having to have sex with them. So this is a tradition that goes on, and the book seems to be a bit about that. So uh, I believe the book of John. So Jesus was the son. Mary is pregnant. So I believe, again, my belief, not necessarily how a church believe, despite the large obelisk and all the other Egyptian artifacts around Rome and around the Holy See. So to take away some of the speculation about why there's Egyptian stuff uh, around the Vatican, around Rome, is to know that I believe Mary. So forget everything you've seen of. Think about any famous person. It is against all rules to say against the holy order to say negative things about a chaste woman or about a woman at all because you don't know her background. I believe Mary, or I believe her mother, Anne or Santa Anna, was Cleopatra the 6th, and her father, um, possibly, well, and her father, a holy man there as well, and I believe that Mary is Cleopatra the 7th. The Cleopatras are Ptolemies, and the Ptolemies were originally a family from Albania, who fought with and traveled with Alexander the Great, who's from next door Macedonia, and they are a Greek family, or a Greek speaking family, who, when Alexander died in 333 before the BC, they took Egypt as their possession, and they made an intention for a long time never to mix with the local population, so the royal families of Egypt could continue independent of the Ptolemies. And as I mentioned before in the previous uh, discernment. The Egypt had kings. There maybe either one king or two, one from Upper Egypt, which is toward the south near Sudan, and one from Lower Egypt, which is toward the north, based on how the Nile River flows, and maybe one from the Sinai Peninsula. And but the king, there may have been a king of Egypt who then assigned the Ptolemies to be his pharaoh. To be, there may have been Scythian kings, and the Scythians preferred outsiders, and so they would have been pharaohs assigned by the king of Egypt, and they would have had their own rulership as a result. At some point, it seems that they became intermixed with the people, possibly, possibly not, and they continued their line. They continued their line until today, in the person of the Prince of the Said, who is Muhammad Ali, or Muhammad Ali Basha, or Ptolemy. My own family, by DNA, traces itself to uh, King Ramses III, and so my last name is Nil. Nil is the way you say Nile River in Egypt, and so I'm at least a prince of the Nile Delta myself, just by heritage. And so the Ptolemies were an assigned group, and they probably mixed in at some point to take some full rulership responsibilities, maybe or maybe not. But they were the assigned pharaoh, and it's very likely that, and this happened during Roman times, a woman of high birth was made a Vestal Virgin, very high honor, given temple, money, heritage, and she was required to remain completely sex free um, for the entire stay of her life, into a certain time period had passed. I'm not sure if in the what we would call like the 30s or 40s BC, if they were allowed to marry or not, or get married or not. Mari means watery or emotional, or Mari could mean of some oceanic body, the Nile River, or maybe uh, the Aegean Sea, the Mediterranean. It was a place name that she had, but Cleopatra was another name. So I believe this is her, and she was to combine Egypt and Rome into a single entity. Uh, Gaius Julius Caesar, who himself was a virgin, as the priest of Jupiter, he was not allowed to have sex either. So these two virgins wanted to produce a holy son. The priest of Jupiter had the blessing of Jupiter, and like I said, I believe a divine parabolic reality called a barycenter about him. I believe he provided Adus or efflux or semen that was then taken by Cleopatra the Seventh. This happened whether or not they were married, and the person who the physical seed was used, and then she became pregnant, and she gave birth to Ptolemy Soter, who was considered the last pharaoh, at least of the Ptolemaic dynasty at that point, whether or not in that line at least, because we know he did not have children, nor do I believe did he leave any others or efflux around to produce any. So he was born, and he was raised. Eventually, Cleopatra was deposed, I think, before this period, and she regained her throne. Caesar having not only, even though they didn't have sex, it was considered that he broke his vow of celibacy by producing, at least the Roman Senate thought this, producing an offspring. He was considered a tyrant, which is not a negative word. It means that Rome suspended democracy for a bit to fight off they went under martial law, and he never gave it up. And so, in the Senate, when he was there, because he had caused a Vestal Virgin to become pregnant, and he had broken his vow of celibacy, at least according to their law, they murdered him. And so Mary was left without, or we would say Cleopatra the Seventh, for safety, in my opinion, not the churches, was left without her husband, non-coital anyway. But Paul would say later, um, it is okay to marry and not to get married but not have sex, and to have a divine marriage, a friendship marriage, for those who do not prefer to have sex with each other or who have taken vows of celibacy. Well, not celibacy, who've taken vows of chastity. Celibacy is to not get married. You can get married and still say chase, for some people, and so this happens. You may see a couple today who are not sexually active, but they're considered a married couple, and they even produce children by this system of others moving forward. So this is whether or not they are the personages of Mary and the Father, let's say, uh, Cleopatra the Seventh and Gaius Julius Caesar, uh, uh, the first, the last tyrant of Rome, who would lead to the emperors of Rome with Augustus, his adopted son, or someone he had adopted during a time period. I believe they produced Ptolemy Soter without any form of sex, and Caesar was actually murdered, or at least given assassination, uh, in effect, the death penalty for violating the sanctity of a Vestal Virgin. But the system also was used for a tricky reason, Vestal Virgins, to prevent a noble woman from having a son in her prime until she was 40, which often wasn't a time when women had children, and to prevent certain the priesthood of Jupiter, to prevent certain men from having children, also that they could be inherited. These are nobles, and they were prevented from it, so other families could possibly continue on in their reign. And so they may have just escaped that system. We have part of the story of Cleopatra and her son fleeing, and she, the seventh, applying an asp, a type of poisonous snake, to her breast and dying, and her son being found later and being killed as well. It's very likely that that was just a story told so they could escape. And we have the whole story of the flight from Jerusalem into Egypt. There may have been a flight from Egypt into Jerusalem where she came to marry again, holding on to her Vestal Virginship, the man that we know as Saint Joseph, who may have been, again, forgetting all the stories that we know about why he did what he did, or no, forget them, but I'll have an explanation for them soon. He may have been Herod the First, the appointed king of Jerusalem, um, and a descendant, as we learned of Joseph. Joseph is Saint Joseph descends directly from David through Solomon. You can read this in the book of Luke. And Mary descends directly from David through his favorite son, Prince Nathaniel. And so Joseph, who I believe was Herod the First, would have adopted Jesus during this time period, and she would have been a proper family wife for him. It may have also been that she was never married to. Well, this is the best way to say it. So this is what. I believe that's something that could have happened, and all the stories that we have in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John about that process are there. And Jesus would have been Ptolemy Soter. And Herod Antipas, the son of Herod the Great, I believe is James. And I also believe that we know that Herod had a harem. James's mother was the the woman that was called Honey. She's portrayed in the Gospels as the one who asked for the head of John the Baptist. And I don't believe that she actually had John the Baptist beheaded. I think she had him removed from his position as chief minister of the kingdom, to put the adopted son of her husband, Jesus Christ, into his position as lead minister, um, and honoring, Cleopatra the Seventh. The women of the harem often honored each other, and so then John left, and I believe John became Apollonius of Tyana, who went on to have an illustrious career discussing religion and living very similar to the way he did. And the vow of John, at least the way that's told in the obedience of 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 the Arabian Peninsula, Arabia Felix of Islam, he is to not have uh, any intimacy with women, though he is to be kind to his mother, who Elizabeth, and he is not to have strong drink. So something that would be, I consider it a Bacardi 151 or something very strong, or some people would say stronger than beer or wine. So those were things that he is to avoid. He went off to study. So I think he left. I don't think he was beheaded. And also, there are all these interesting stories of when Jesus, I believe, who I call Ptolemy Soter, was also the Emperor Tiberius or Tiberius Caesar. And he ruled for a time in Rome. At some time, Pontius Pilate says to him later, uh, "Are you a king?" And he says, "Well, that's what you call it here," implying in Egypt he's called Pharaoh, and in Rome he's called Caesar, Emperor. And he had an event in his life early on in the first part of his reign. Tiberius did have this event, who I associate with being Jesus, of he had a birthday event, and oh, so there was a kingdom of Rome before there was the empire, and in a temple that had a statue of Ganymede, the wine bearer. And while they were inside this temple, well, it was a cave, there was a cave in. And the servant of Tiberius Caesar, this is an event that happened. Uh, Everyone died, and the servant of Tiberius Caesar, his good friend, leapt in front of him, and the stone fell on him, and there was Tiberius Caesar, the only one left alive. And he was there for some time until the Praetorian Guard can come and dig them out, and he was carried out. And it may have been that he went to Jerusalem back to there to pay some kind of penance for what had happened and walked away, maybe let the Senate rule for a time and walked away and lived the 3 years or so in Jerusalem, and may have felt a need to create a religious system, as Numa did in the 800s, and also to experience death, kind of a final destination. And his crucifixion would have caused him to become to die, and to be placed in the hewn out rock cave, which I've been into. And I was when I put my head down on the place where he kind of was bunched up and laying. I got an electrical shock there, and I mean, however wonderful and mystical that is, the reason is there's the sun beats down on piezoelectric or magnetic rock and causes it to get a charge on it. And now there are all these lights, Christmas lights and stuff around it. And once that charge is enough, and you have a conductor, it shocks you. So I believe sometime after he was placed there, there was no autopsy or anything like that. He knew the properties of it. That there was effectively a defibrillator. He was shocked back into life. So even though he had was what we call was dead, he was shocked back into life, and there was enough. Uh, he was able to return to life, and he walked out. He rose on that third day. Maybe that was when he probably got out of there. There may have been a way they someone rode back. There may have been like a check or something. Maybe this was known property of this place. So he walked out. An angel helped him out. An angel may have been one of these, an angel of the Lord, of course, or there are other people, a giant or uh, some foreigner, magi, or someone helped him just to keep a rational take on it. Maybe, like to say, a Samoyed, a Mongolian, or something, my own background helped him out, and he walked around and he was amongst the people for 40 days, and then he was taken up to heaven. And this is where you get a bit of the Mormon tradition. I'm trying to bring everyone's tradition together with proof. If you read the Book of Mormon, it's chronological. It begins around the year 600 BC, and it talks about, and this is right before the Assyrians came into Jerusalem and kidnapped or escorted the highborn families. to their ancestral lands in Babylon. And they were escorted out there or taken there, however you want to see it. But before this happened, there were people who knew it was going to happen, and they lived in the Sinai Peninsula and other places. And so they knew that their holy books and things like that would be taken and maybe uh, destroyed. And so they went in, and this is in I think, the first chapter of the Book of Mormon, around 600 BC. They went in, and to the keeper's home were some of the ancient documents, probably just from David, not very long before that. David lived, I think, in the 800s, and Solomon and maybe the judges, maybe Saul. They took these books and other texts that may not have been those, but that they had as part of their family line. And when you read the Old Testament, as it's called by some, it's really a family history. They took them and they had instructions to build a ship. Egypt had a ship, the ship of Ra. You can still see it. It used to be next to the pyramids. Now it's in a museum not far from it. A large ship. They had instructions to build a large ship and a compass. Some uh, a piece of iron needle that told you which direction you were going, and they went and they traveled to a known place. Again, Native Americans, my American Indians. I'm Athabascan, which is kind of an overarching name for those who've been living west of the Mississippi for a long time, or maybe even for everyone. As we've descended for 36,000 years, this place has been known, and we came over here from Siberia and from also Japan and Indonesia and Australia using canoes. And canoe isn't just a small kayak; it could be something much bigger. So they had instructions to build a boat and a compass, and they may have known where America was, or Atlantis, which was also known as heaven. California is the farthest extent of heaven, or the beginning of it, and Los Angeles is the place where the angels are. So it's very likely that and then so the book tells that they traveled and some of their difficulties. I think this was a tribe of Nephes or Naphtali, and they would have had a Levite with them, or Levites, and some possibly some other tribes with them as well, maybe Dan. And they got on a boat and they traveled. Now, I don't think they would have traveled through the Mediterranean. They would have had to, even from the Sinai, they would have had to take off from the very north of the Sinai, where they probably weren't traditionally. They probably weren't there, and they would have had to go through. Well, now there's a Suez Canal, but they would have either had to go past just a lot of danger. Even in the 600s, there would have been a lot of people on the water in the Mediterranean, and then they would have had to pass through the Straits of Gibraltar, which may or may not have been easy to do. It may have been that the Mediterranean was lower than the Atlantic or higher, and then of course, and then crossing the Atlantic Ocean, there aren't as many islands to stop at to do that. So I don't believe they went that way, the way that Christopher Columbus will come later. I believe that they followed the Sinai Peninsula downward onto the Arabian Peninsula, went around Yemen, where some there are people who are red or are and Yemenite Jews. They may have picked up some of them as well. This would have been some of the descendants of Solomon and the princess Bilqis, Makeda, the queen of Sheba, and gone with them. So you have the Nephi, other people who would have come from possibly uh, the Sinai Peninsula and Jerusalem, and the Lamanites who would have come from Yemen, and all again people who would have had descendants in, or who would have had ancestors potentially in the United States or at that point. And I think they went through the Indian Ocean and across the Pacific, where there are quite a few islands that you could cross over. And I think they landed in Los Angeles and landed there where people had been landing as one of the places for, at that point, 30,000 years, 34,000 years at that point. So it was a known route, and they began their story there. Because they had already done that, and there were Jews there who at some point may or may not have mixed. Well, of course they did, with the locals who were there, who had come from, again, Mongolia and Japan and Siberia and Indonesia and others over just a long period of time. I think that definitely Ptolemy Soter or the Emperor Tiberius would have known of this place. And so when it says Jesus was taken up after the 40 days into heaven, they had hot air balloons, that he may have literally been taken up in a hot air balloon. And he gone on a ship through the Mediterranean, because it would have been his, the Roman Sea, and through the Straits of Gibraltar, and landed on the East Coast, and met a colony of people who spoke at least his language or had a translator, and really did travel briefly to the United States, and teach people through a translator there where they remembered him, and then headed back to for about 7 years or so, rule as Tiberius Caesar, before passing it on to Caligula, and then made it eventually to the island of Patmos, where he lived the rest of his life with the name of his Levitical cousin. He's from Judah, John, and he would have also kept this entire time his vow, not to have any children, not to have any intimacy with women, and to he may have taken it, like he would have kept that vow, and to be he had been kind to his mother, who continued to live in Jerusalem for about 40 or 50 years. He lived for a long time teaching her message and his message in Jerusalem for some time after the events of the crucifixion in around 29 or so AD. And the calendar had been fixed by Caesar, and it's my understanding that it's nearly impossible to decipher certain dates for reason. But so Tiberius Caesar passed away, for instance, and Caligula took over. And I believe he was on Patmos as a monk for a long time. And the events of the book of Revelation are of John of Patmos, are actually of Jesus, Ptolemy Soter, Caesar, Tiberius Caesar, having a vision of a very important being, important to the again bringing people together. The would become the rabbinical community, the Pharisees at that time, and his name was uh, Metatron. So there's Metatron, who this is in the book of Genesis. You have Enoch, who loved the Lord, who walked and talked with God, and was not, for God took him. And he said he was transfigured into an angel. And the angel was called Metatron. And the tradition is that he became one of the early rulers of Egypt, one of the most beloved, if not the most beloved rulers of Egypt. Egypt was called Earth. And he ruled, and then he withdrew from them. And his son, uh, Metin Salah, often called Methuselah. A metin is a certain type of rhythm, that a tune, and Salah is peace or serenity. So it was as if he were a psalm or a tune of serenity. While his father became Metatron, they usually spell Metatron with 6 letters, and for Enoch, and the Metatron with 7 letters for Metan Salah. But he became Ultron, Metatron Ultron. And so he was considered a very important angel, a guide, a Ibu, a spirit that watched over you. And so the one who had hair and head that was white, feet of bronze, because it's very likely that Jesus himself was very fair skinned, uh, individual with like bright blue eyes, the way that a Roman would look. And they were very unique looking people. White skinned, blue eyed people were very strange to see in the Mediterranean. And when the Romans came through, they were a very unique people. So the angel that's described that he sees in his vision, whether it was with ergot, which is a ritual, it's a, a kind of a yeast or a a fungus that grows upon rye or from rye, and that can be used to induce visions that would otherwise only come in spurts at night that you couldn't see. So it could have been an ergot ritual or samadhi yoga or some other type of wonderful thing that at that point he had learned and known, or he had this vision, calling himself John of Patmos, and where he saw Otron, he saw this angel, and he saw him, he spoke to him, and then he sent instructions. Maybe some people knew where he was, to the various churches, the seven churches which are in Asia. And he instructed them through this vision. And the book of Revelation, I believe, was very likely written or dictated by Jesus himself, to uh, and he's the one who's the subject of the book. He's John, who's talking there, and so and if you want some so uh, interlude for those who are like, well, where's our mystery? Where's our specialness? Uh, St. Paul does say in the book of Corinthians that there are gods. Of course, they're gods, just the way you understand them. However, we serve the Lord, the one who has the spirit of Jupiter. We serve him because the gods, at some point, at least in tradition, rebelled against Jupiter, and caused him to be dethroned. And then, he regained his throne eventually. So it's there's a very strange story there. I withhold myself because of its implications. And St. Paul says as well that he and Barabbas were walking in the village, right around the place where um, um, Pythagoras was lived, in Syria, right at the south of Turkey. And when he walked in, the people thought that he was Hermes or Mercury, and that Barabbas was Jupiter himself. Not that was Jupiter. We know that Paul saw the Lord on the road to Damascus. So was Barabbas another Abbas, Bar, the son of Ab, father, As, God, the Son of Father God, is what Barabbas means. So was Paul walking with Jesus? And they said they thought they saw, and Father God for that point would have been Saturn. So they thought they saw him walking. They thought they saw Hermes, or called Mercury, and they thought they saw Zeus, called Jupiter. And they called the priest to verify, and there are traditions going back to the beginning of Rome of Jupiter and Hermes, or Jupiter and Mercury, or Hermes and Zeus, walking around and kind of meeting people and uh, getting to know them. And so they could scarce, and they asked them, "Should we build you tabernacles?" Just as one of the disciples at the Transfiguration of Christ asked, "Well, we see Elijah, we see him." And I have all these theories about holograms and how they could have been used and already at that time, or and where they came from. They could have come from above. So they saw Elijah and they saw Moses, and they said, "Should we build you three tabernacles, three temples for you to be in, so you could be worshipped?" And so Paul kind of says, "Oh well, we could scarce stop them from sacrificing bulls to us." In which they did. So there's some mystery there. But he also says, who are you following? Are you following Paul? Are you following Apollonius maybe, Apollos? Or are you following the Lord? So even though there may be gods, we follow the Lord. And so going back to John of Patmos, possibly being Ptolemy Soter, Tiberius Caesar, Jesus Christ, and the angel he saw at the very first book of Revelation being Ultron, Metin Salah, called Methuselah by some people, whether that was him. So that John of Patmos, I believe the writer of the book, the Gospel of John, is Jesus. Jesus wrote it. And the reason why, and going back to how from a legal standpoint, of something it was said by one person or another. There was a certain pattern. If you read the book, which is maybe why uh, Atso, Atso Milk, our brother or father Atso Milk, you know, wanted some interloping in it to hide this, actually. Because there's times when in the book of John, there's a very awkward Jesus Christ the Lord said, and it's written in such a way where if I had to write Christopher Neal, attorney, Christopher Neal, the attorney for the plaintiff said, um, I could write it, but it would be awkward to kind of not only speak in the third person, but to add a title for someone who had any modicum of humility. So I believe that Jesus wrote the book of John, and then he was the one who talked to us about his cousin, his friend John, and what happened to him. And he's also the one who tells you that John was not the Messiah. He wasn't the Redeemer. I got that from James, who I believe was Herod Antipas, Herod the Second's. I got that from his mom, Honey, and I also believe if you want to go into the tradition put up forward by Dan Brown uh, about the family of the Lord, the prior Sion, a man has a harem. Usually, this is kind of a dormitory for women. I don't. They're not always used for sexual relations. The prince knew his mother. His mother had passed away. She's called Honey in part because Herod the Great is said to have kept her body in a large vat of honey in his apartment to prevent her from being dug up or violated by anyone, and to speed up her her degradation. And the way he knew it is that he would open the he would open it a bit, and he would tap his finger in and smell the honey, or some people even said he tasted it, and eventually it would have a rancid taste. That means the flesh was ready to be removed from the bones, and it's a Jewish tradition that usually after a year, you remove the flesh from the bones of the dead person and you put them in a small box. He would have sped up that process. So I believe that Miriam Magdala, was a royal woman who was responsible, who was a wife or a member of the harem of Herod the Great, who was responsible for the harem. But uh, she was given eventually to Herod Antipas, or she, out of love and affection and her wonderful service to Jesus in their movement, became the wife of James the First. That's why Jesus said on the cross, woman to his mother, this is your son. And man to James, this is your mother. So just to let them know that there's no intimate relationship between you two. And I believe that Maryam of Magdala was there, and he would have also said, and this is your wife, just to be clear. And so then she would have married James the First, who was Herod Antipas, and they, Mary Magdala and James the First, and James, right, Mary Magdala and James the Just, Saint James, the brother by adoption of the Lord of Jesus Christ, would have married and produced another line, meaning that since James is the son of a man who descends from Solomon, James would have been of Judah and would have and with the Lady of Magdala would have produced other descendants of Solomon. And down to this day, there are people known to be from that line. And so, why are they special? They're special because they're known to descend from Solomon. The only other family known to descend from Solomon are those in Ethiopia, and they're known to have descended from Solomon. They Between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, there was a line kept also of individuals who descended from Solomon, who were considered a holy line. So there will be their line, and I believe that in many respects the Messiah comes from the one who's we're waiting for. It's not in Orthodox Christian tradition isn't a reincarnation of Jesus, but a righteous man from the line of David, and I believe that person is a man named His Imperial Highness, the Crown Prince Imperial of Ethiopia, Yoel. Um, it is also possible that it could be someone from this rose line, this golden line that comes from James the Just, or Saint James, and Mary of Magdala, who going with the Dan Brown understanding, which probably is correct, would move to France, a place that along the coast would have known Rome, and at some point James, either himself or after he was interred, his finger would make it to, but probably himself to Spain. So I think they have a line of children who were born, and they are the ones who descend from the known line from the Hashemonian dynasty. I'm a Levite who comes from Ephraim and Manasseh as well. I have no Judah heritage in me, so it is not me, I like to say. Not me. So next, after that, there, because I think it's better to split these into two. So that's the introduction to the Geneva Bible, the book of John. And before we get to the prologue, uh, I will then read the Geneva Bible, the book of John, chapter 1, verse 1 through verse 39, as it is written in the Geneva Bible, which has um, not only the text from in English, which was a vernacular. English is Low German, so you have High German, which is spoken in Austria, as I term it. Then there's Middle German, spoken in what is now German among the Teutonic Knights, and then there is Low German, which is English. English is a Germanic language. I think English is a reconstituted language that came over uh, from Atlantis, which is, according to Plato's Critias and descriptions, not only England inherited from the United States. So these are all wonderful things to consider and think about as you go forward. I have many. There's a famous story among the mystics, Ladino, originally then Islamic mystics of North Africa. Ladino are a branch of Judaism, or a people, and the mystics of Islam, North Africa, are Sufis, and they had lived together for some time in Spain. There's a man who walked through town and said, "I have 1,000 proofs for the existence of God." And an old woman came over and hit him with her purse, or some similar thing, and said, "If you had faith, you wouldn't need proof." And I say that to say, if you're a person who this bothers, I've said this in some of my other recordings on YouTube, I would stop here. Whether you just read the book directly or you listen to me, you may have some interruptions in your faith. Because of it. A lot of this information is really for people who either are scholastics who already know some of this information and might want to put it together, or people who are rationalists who say, I'm tired of hearing about some of the more fantastic stories that we hear in the Bible. I want to hear something rational that could have happened. And so just offer the family of Jesus Christ and from there sacrifice another opportunity to win over converts to this other greater story here. So I'll stop here, and then in the next part, I intend to read the Geneva Bible straight through, so it'll be a little bit choppy. It'll sound that way, but it's done intentionally.